Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to the first video of October actually, which I'm really excited about because I'm a bit obsessed with autumn/Halloween season. We do celebrate Halloween where I live and I go a little bit all out, so that's why there's a broomstick in the background if you are wondering why there's a broomstick in the background. I do want to talk really quickly about colors, so as I hold them up, the first thing you might notice is I don't have just a bunch of oranges that I'm using. I'm using some brown tones and things like that, and it's very important if you want to have dimension that you incorporate more colors than just what you see to the eye right away looking at a photo. Of course, you would see orange looking at a pumpkin. That's not all that we're going to be using because we want to create more dimension than that. I'm going to really quickly swatch out the colors from my set that I'm using so that you can color match if you'd like to, but it doesn't really matter if you don't have the exact colors or if you don't use the exact same number of colors that I do for this, as long as you just have kind of a variety and you pick out from your reference photo what kind of undertones and things like that you see. As usual, the first thing I'm going to do is lighten up my graphite sketch with my kneaded eraser. It's perfectly fine to sketch in graphite for any medium that you're going to be using, but you don't want that graphite to stick onto your paper and show up later in your final work, so it's important to lighten up your sketch so that you can still see it, but so that there is not too much extra graphite left on the paper. So first and foremost, the pumpkin has kind of an odd shape. It's rather oddly shaped in comparison to other things that you might be used to drawing. So what I want to make sure that I'm doing is not only figuring out where my shadowed areas are, and I am filling those in with my raw umber. You can use whatever brown pencil that you have if you don't have a big collection, but I am filling that shadowed area in with raw umber, and then I'm paying attention to where there's creases in between these sort of sections of the pumpkin. And in those creases, I am going to kind of use a little bit more pressure with my brown pencil, but not to the point where I'm creating a sharp line. We can always sharpen and define things a little bit later, but to start out, you don't want to just go in and do a really harsh line, even to define something like creases. It's better to do soft blending, and what I mean by soft blending is blending the brown tones into the surrounding orange areas so that it looks like more of a gradient. Even in the depth of like the creases, you don't want anything to look too harsh and unnatural. And then of course, after I added my shadow tones, I went ahead and layered my oranges on top. And as I mentioned before, you don't really need to have a ton of oranges. I'm using, I think, just 2, or if you count the burnt ochre, I think it's 3, but I'm using just 2 actual like oranges, and a more pure orange color and then a lighter, more yellow orange color. And the point of this is not really what exact orange colors or even what exact brown colors you use. If you have a big set, by all means utilize the colors that you have, but if you don't have a big set, the important thing is that you get your shadows in and your highlights in and you're able to deepen up areas, and that's why we're using browns in the shadowed areas, the creases, everything like that. And if you don't have a super light pencil for your highlights, you don't really actually need one. What you can do is kind of just leave those areas white and then create a little bit of a gradient so that it's not just a bright white spot. So what I mean by gradient is you kind of just lightly fade into the lighter area with your orange pencil that you're using. You can kind of see that I did that in that middle section. My highlight is not going to be completely white. The biggest challenge in this drawing is going to be creating those very deep and dark creases without actually creating too harsh of a line that doesn't look realistic and doesn't blend in with the surrounding areas. So how I can avoid that, even though this crease is going to be extremely dark, is I can kind of blend the brown and orange tones together, kind of right next to the crease where the brown is going to fade out into the orange. I want to very softly blend those areas together, and then when I get to the actual crease area itself, then I can add brown with medium pressure, but I don't want it to be like an even line going down, if that makes sense. I kind of want some areas to have more color than others, so it looks like it varies a little bit and it looks more natural, if that makes any sense. You can also see that the bottom of the pumpkin So where the pumpkin is sitting, I'm not actually going to create a cast shadow showing the shadow on the surface the pumpkin is sitting on for this drawing, but even just the creases at the bottom where the pumpkin curves in, those are going to be some of the darkest areas in the drawing too, because the light just wouldn't be getting to those areas. So you want to make sure that you can kind of identify where the light source is coming from in your reference photo, and don't just make up highlights where you think highlights should go, or shadows where you think shadows should go, and just copy your reference photo and really notice which area the highlight is hitting on different sections. So on the pumpkin, as I go through, I'm going to have highlights in different areas on each section just because of how the shapes are different and the light is hitting it at a different angle depending on where the shape is. And for each crease, I definitely want to make sure I'm blending the brown tone out into the orange. And that is really important. You just don't want your shadows to look too harsh, especially in a drawing like this where there are a lot of kind of harsh shadows and you have to build them up rather than right away just go in and create a dark line, because that will really ruin the realism of your drawing. So definitely don't do that. I do want to talk a little bit about things like texture and style and paper, but before we get into that, I do want to let you guys know that this drawing took me a total of 4 hours to color. So even though it's sped up a lot for the sake of this video and this tutorial, it actually took me a really long time. And if your colored pencil work is kind of frustrating and you feel a little bit impatient or like it's taking a while, that's totally normal. Colored pencil is just a slow medium, and even just drawing something like this, which is just a pumpkin, literally just a vegetable, took me 4 hours to color in. And because of that, I am going to make this into a Skillshare class so that I don't have to speed it up as much and I can go more into detail about things like technique and colors for those of you who are interested in that. I do already have a Skillshare class up on how I drew a realistic tulip in colored pencil. That's been up for a few months and it's really suitable for beginners or even if you're intermediate in colored pencils. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the link to that down below. I do have a link that will allow you 2 free months on Skillshare if you are interested in taking that class. And I'm going to be working on making this drawing into a class as well, so definitely keep your eyes peeled for that if you're interested. Okay, so now back to the pumpkin drawing. So I want to talk a little bit about paper because I feel that it's actually a really important thing that sometimes gets overlooked with colored pencil art. So your paper is going to have a lot to do with how your end result turns out. So you can see that in this particular drawing, I have a lot of texture in the pumpkin. It's not a completely smooth result. And that is actually a stylistic choice, and I purposely chose to use a Bristol vellum surface paper. It's Strathmore Bristol vellum. And I wanted there to be a bit more of a texture because sometimes I actually do like a little bit of a texture in my colored pencil art. But a lot of people would rather get a perfectly smooth result, and in that case I would consider using a smoother toothed paper so that you don't get a lot of texture, or using a solvent to really blend out, or even burnishing at the end of your layering process so that you can burnish out any tooth of the paper that is left over and just get a completely smooth result. If you prefer the style of having a little bit more texture, then I suggest you pick a paper that has a bit more tooth to it, like the paper that I'm using, for example, and then you will get the texture that you desire. But this is also a lot kind of a stylistic choice. Some artists want there to be a little bit more texture to their drawings and others don't. It really depends on what you personally want, but I do want to let you guys know I'm not going to be blending this out completely smooth. I am going to leave a little bit of texture in my drawing. Now, as I'm working towards the back of the pumpkin, of course, this gets easier because you can see less of the sections in the back of the pumpkin than you can the front. But I do want to mention how the highlight varies a lot, like I was talking about earlier. Depending on where each section is located, there's a highlight in a different area, so you definitely want to pay attention to that. And if you guys can notice, I actually used a violet gray color, which you might have seen earlier when I talked about colors, but I used my violet gray a little bit around the highlighted areas as well as a shadowed area near the stem on the left, if you can see that, because I did notice a bit of a purple tone coming out in my reference photo, but nothing too bright. just a kind of like grayish purple tone, so I used my violet gray for that. And that's another thing I wanted to go over is if you see an unusual color in your reference photo near a highlight or anywhere really, don't be afraid to actually go in and use it, because there actually are a lot of colors that reflect and a lot of different things going on that you wouldn't really necessarily think are there. Like, you wouldn't expect to use a violet color in a pumpkin drawing, but you never really know because light can reflect in weird ways, and it will just look more realistic if you are bold with that and adventurous, as long as you don't accidentally go overboard. I definitely encourage you to try it out. If you see a specific color, don't be afraid to use it. Another thing I really should have mentioned in the beginning is I kind of recommend coloring in the direction that a shape curves in naturally. So for each section, they're going to go in a different direction. So I'm going to follow that direction with my pencil when I'm coloring. That kind of just helps you to get a more even and realistic look, versus if you were to color all over the place in different directions, it might not look as natural in the end. So I do recommend doing that as well. Now most of the pumpkin is completed, I'm going to go ahead and start working on the stem. And the most important things to focus on when you're working on the stem, first of all, don't skip out on doing the shadows and leaving some areas highlighted, because you still want your stem to look three-dimensional. When you sketch your stem, make sure that it has a little bit of a curve to it, because rarely is it completely straight. You want it to look realistic. And also make sure you don't skip the area where it shows kind of how the stem is connecting to the pumpkin. If you can see that in your reference photo, that's important to make everything go together as well. But compared to the rest of the drawing, this didn't take me as long and was rather easy, and I just added a couple details there at the end. And that's it for the tutorial today, guys, and I am going to be doing some more like autumn, fall, Halloween related drawings this month, because October is my favorite month, fall is my favorite season, and it's fall where I live, so I hope you guys don't mind that. There's going to be a lot of heavily influenced by the season drawings coming up. And also, if you are interested in that Skillshare class, don't forget that I did leave the link down in the description, and this particular drawing has not been turned into a Skillshare class yet, but I will let you guys know when that is done. I'm going to be working on that as well in case you're interested in that. So that's all for today's video. I hope that this is fun for you guys if you end up trying out this tutorial, and that some of my tips were helpful, and that you guys were able to learn something from this and just learn something about colored pencil, because I feel like there's always something to learn about colored pencil. Thank you guys so much for watching. Definitely leave a comment below. Let me know what you thought of the video. And if you enjoyed the video, you can leave a like as well, and check out some of my other art tutorials. I do have a lot. I've been posting on this channel for like a year now, and I post pretty much every week. So I do have a lot of tutorials that might be helpful for you guys. But anyways, thank you guys again so much for watching today's video, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye guys!